An old man covered a dying alien with his coat. By sunrise, his house was lifted into the sky. The clockmaker's solitude. The tiny coastal village of Moorhaven knew winter like an old friend, sometimes gentle, often harsh, but always expected. What they didn't expect was how the season would forever change the life of Tobias Merrick, the village clockmaker who lived in the stone cottage at the edge of the cliffs. At 73, Tobias moved with deliberate slowness, much like the antique timepieces that filled his workshop. His fingers, still nimble despite the arthritis that twisted his knuckles, adjusted the delicate gears of a pocket watch while winter winds rattled his windows. Outside, the first snow of December fell in thick, lazy flakes. "What do you think, Eleanor?" he asked the empty chair by the hearth. "Will Mrs. Pembroke be pleased with her grandfather's watch restored?" 5 years since Eleanor's passing, and still he spoke to her. The villagers considered it eccentric but harmless. Just old Tobias and his conversations with ghosts. What they didn't understand was how silence had become his enemy, how the ticking of clocks was the only thing keeping his heart beating in rhythm. That evening, as darkness settled early across the landscape, the storm intensified. Tobias stoked the fire, made his usual cup of chamomile tea, and prepared for another night of solitude. The wind howled a mournful tune, almost drowning out the strange whistling sound that cut through the air outside. Tobias paused, teacup halfway to his lips. That wasn't the wind. It was something else, something that ended with a dull thud against the earth near his garden gate. Curiosity overcame caution. He donned his heavy coat, lit a lantern, and stepped into the swirling snow. The beam of light wavered across his frost-covered garden until it caught something that gleamed like amethyst beneath the moon. "Good heavens," Tobias whispered, approaching slowly. It was a woman, at least she had the shape of one. But her skin shimmered with a luminescent purple glow, pulsing weakly like a fading heartbeat. Where the snow touched her, it melted and evaporated instantly. Her eyes, when they flickered open briefly, were silver with no pupils, and strange markings adorned her temples and cheeks. Tobias stood frozen, lantern trembling in his grip. In all his years, he had never seen anything like her. Fear told him to retreat inside, to lock his door, to pretend he'd seen nothing. But something deeper, perhaps the same instinct that had made him a gentle husband and a kind neighbor, moved him forward instead. She was injured. Strange as she was suffering. "You're all right now," he said softly, kneeling beside her despite the protest of his joints. "I don't know what you are or where you're from, but you're safe here." He removed his coat despite the biting cold and carefully wrapped it around her slender form. Her skin was hot to the touch, like fever heat, but somehow different, as though she burned with an inner light rather than illness. With strength he hadn't needed to summon in years, Tobias lifted her. She weighed surprisingly little, and as he carried her toward his cottage, her head rolled against his shoulder. A small sound escaped her lips, not quite words, but definitely a response. "My name is Tobias," he told her as he shouldered open his door, "and I suppose you'll be staying for tea once you wake up." He laid her gently on his sofa before the fireplace, watching in fascination as the purple glow of her skin cast dancing patterns across his ceiling, mingling with the orange flicker of flames. For the first time since Eleanor had left this world, Tobias felt something long dormant stirring in his chest. Wonder. The visitor's awakening, Tobias spent the night in his armchair, watching over the strange woman as she lay motionless except for the gentle rise and fall of her chest. The purple luminescence of her skin had dimmed to a soft glow, like twilight captured beneath glass. He'd covered her with quilts despite the heat she radiated, feeling it was the proper thing to do. Dawn broke with unusual brilliance, sending shafts of golden light through Tobias's windows. It was then that his visitor finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing those remarkable silver eyes that seemed to hold galaxies within them. "You're awake," Tobias said, leaning forward. "Can you understand me?" She studied him for several long moments before her lips parted. "Yes." Her voice had an unusual resonance, as though several tones spoke at once. "You helped me. Found you in my garden, nearly frozen through. Or so I thought," Tobias explained, pouring tea from the pot he'd kept warm through the night. "Though I suspect cold affects you differently than it does me." A small smile touched her lips. "My body temperature adjusts to survive, but the crash landing, it damaged my core stability. She sat up slowly, the quilts falling away. The strange markings on her face and neck seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. I am Nyara, cosmic cartographer of the Lumidian confluence. Tobias Merrick, clockmaker of Moorhaven Village, he replied with unexpected lightness. Though I suspect your title carries more weight in the grand scheme of things. Nyara's laughter sounded like chimes. Perhaps, but importance isn't measured by distance traveled. She looked around his cottage, taking in the dozens of clocks that adorned his walls. You measure time. I repair the instruments that measure it, he corrected. Though at my age, time has become something of an adversary. For my people, time is a medium. Like water to fish, she said, standing with surprising steadiness. We navigate through it rather than against it. Over breakfast, Nyara politely declining food but fascinated by the concept of tea, she explained more about herself. The Lumidians were explorers and map-makers of space, documenting cosmic phenomena and establishing connections between distant worlds. Her ship had malfunctioned passing through Earth's atmosphere, forcing an emergency landing. My vessel is self-repairing, she explained. It needs time to recalibrate after the damage sustained. And you? Tobias asked. Are you self-repairing as well? Nyara gazed at him with those silver eyes. Your compassion accelerated my healing. Lumidians form empathic bonds with beings who show genuine kindness. It's rare but powerful when it happens. Tobias felt warmth spread across his cheeks. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said simply. They would not. Fear typically overrides compassion when confronted with the unknown. As morning progressed into afternoon, strange things began happening throughout the cottage. The pendulums of several clocks swung in perfect synchronicity, though they had never done so before. Objects seemed to briefly defy gravity when Nyara passed them. The air grew charged like the moment before lightning strikes. Something's happening, Tobias noted, watching as a teaspoon lifted slightly from the table before settling back down. Nyara's expression grew concerned. My ship, it's establishing a connection with me. It senses my recovery. That's good, isn't it? Tobias asked, noticing how the floorboards beneath his feet had begun to vibrate subtly. Yes, but... She paused, her markings pulsing brighter. The empathic bond we've formed, it's affecting the connection. You're home. It's becoming part of the equation. As if in response to her words, a deep rumble reverberated through the cottage. The vibrations intensified, and dust sifted down from the ceiling beams. Every clock in the house began to chime at once, regardless of the time they displayed. Tobias, Nyara said, reaching for his hand. Her touch sent tingles up his arm. We need to prepare. Your dwelling is about to ascend. Ascend? What do you mean? His question died in his throat as he looked out the window. The ground was no longer there. Ascension. The cottage shuddered violently, then steadied as it rose through the morning air. Tobias clutched the windowsill, watching in disbelief as his garden, then the village, then the entire coastline shrank beneath them. This isn't possible, he whispered, though the evidence before him suggested otherwise. The ship's tether beam has locked onto my presence, Nyara explained, seemingly unbothered by their ascent. But our empathic connection has confused its protocols. It believes your dwelling is part of me. Tobias laughed despite himself, a nervous, exhilarated sound. I've lived in this cottage for 47 years. Never once expected it to fly. They passed through clouds, the stone walls of the cottage somehow maintaining their integrity despite the increasing altitude. Inside, objects floated gently in the reduced gravity, but the structure itself remained solid around them. Your vessel must be powerful indeed to lift an entire house, Tobias remarked, watching his favorite pocket watch drift past his head. The Lumidian ships operate on principles beyond conventional physics, Nyara said. We harness the energy of cosmic connections, what you might call the bonds between particles that comprise reality itself. As they broke through the cloud layer, Tobias gasped. Above them, silhouetted against the deep blue of the upper atmosphere, hovered a massive shape unlike anything he had seen before. Not the metallic disk of human imagination, but something organic and crystalline simultaneously, a structure that seemed to bend light around it, with graceful spires and curves that defied earthly architecture. My ship, Nyara said with obvious affection, the astral cartographer. It's beautiful, Tobias breathed, feeling suddenly insignificant yet privileged. At 73, when most men were contemplating the end of their journey, he was beginning an unimaginable new one. As they approached the vessel, a portion of its crystalline surface rippled and parted like water. The cottage, with remarkable gentleness, was drawn into this opening and settled within a vast chamber whose walls pulsed with the same purple luminescence as Nyara's skin. When the motion stopped, gravity seemed to normalize. Objects that had been floating drifted back down, and Tobias found his footing again. Through the windows, he could see his cottage now sat in what appeared to be a massive biodome. His garden gate opening to a meadow of strange, glowing plants that couldn't possibly exist on Earth. "We've been absorbed?" he asked, trying to comprehend. Nyara nodded. "The ship has integrated your dwelling for your comfort. It recognizes you are connected to me but requires specific environmental conditions." She approached him then, her movements fluid and graceful. In the light of her ship, her features seemed more defined, more vibrant. The markings on her skin pulsed in rhythms that reminded Tobias of his beloved clocks. "I must connect with the ship's systems to understand what happens next," she explained. "Will you be all right alone for a short time? You are safe here." Tobias nodded, finding himself unexpectedly calm. "I've spent years alone, my dear. A few more minutes won't trouble me." Something in his tone made her pause. She reached out, her fingers lightly touching his weathered cheek. The contact sent warmth spreading through him. Not just physical heat, but something deeper. A connection that made his heart race in a way it hadn't for decades. "You have a remarkable spirit, Tobias Merrick," she said softly. "My people believe that souls recognize each other across vast distances. Perhaps ours have been traveling toward this meeting for longer than we know." Before he could respond, she turned and walked through the cottage wall as if it were no more substantial than mist, leaving Tobias standing in his familiar home, surrounded by the utterly unfamiliar cosmos. "Well, Eleanor," he whispered to the empty air, "I do believe our quiet life has taken quite the turn." For the first time since her passing, he didn't feel the sharp ache of loss when speaking her name. Instead, there was a gentle warmth, like the closing of one chapter before the beginning of another unexpected one. Some worlds between hearts. The ship hummed with life around Tobias's cottage, creating an otherworldly symphony that somehow complemented the ticking of his many clocks. He'd ventured out into the biodome several times, marveling at plants that responded to his presence by changing colors or emitting soft musical notes. The air was perfectly breathable, though it carried scents he couldn't identify, something like cinnamon and ozone and ocean depths all at once. When Nyara returned, she moved with renewed vigor, her purple skin now shimmering with brighter constellations of light that shifted beneath the surface. "Your connection with the ship's systems was successful then?" Tobias asked, pouring tea from habit, though he now understood she didn't need physical sustenance as humans did. "Yes," she said, accepting the cup anyway, a gesture he appreciated. "The astral cartographer has integrated your home perfectly, but there is something unexpected." "More unexpected than my cottage being snatched into space?" Tobias raised an eyebrow, his weathered face crinkling with amusement. Nyara's silver eyes sparkled. "The empathic connection between us has deepened beyond normal parameters. The ship detects it as a dual piloting signature, meaning, she said, setting down her untouched tea. "That part of you is now bonded with the ship's navigational matrix. Your thoughts, memories, desires, they're influencing our trajectory." Tobias sat heavily in his armchair. "I'm steering this vessel? But I know nothing of space travel." "Not consciously steering," Nyara clarified, "but your heart's deepest wishes are being interpreted by the ship's emotional compass." She knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. At the contact, images flooded Tobias's mind. Vast nebulae in colors no human eye had witnessed. Planets with rings of crystalline fragments that sang as they rotated. Civilizations built on principles so foreign yet somehow familiar. "These are your memories," he whispered in awe. "And I've been seeing yours," Nyara confirmed. "Your life with Eleanor, your quiet joys, your silent sorrows after her passing. The ship is facilitating this exchange, binding our experiences together." A tear slipped down Tobias's cheek. "Then you know how much I loved her." "Yes," Nyara said softly. "And it's beautiful, Tobias. Love like that doesn't diminish with death, it transforms. My people believe that such connections are simply stars in the constellation of our existence." Later that evening, though, time seemed increasingly relative aboard the ship. Nyara showed him the navigation chamber. Unlike the mechanical controls Tobias had imagined, it was a circular room where holographic displays floated like luminous jellyfish, responding to Niara's movements with graceful precision. "We're currently passing what your astronomers call the Kuiper Belt," she explained. "Beyond your solar system lies open space and infinite possibilities." She guided his hand through a particularly complex display, and the walls around them became transparent, revealing the breathtaking expanse of space. Earth was already a diminishing blue point behind them. "It's overwhelming," Tobias admitted. "All my life spent in one village, and now you're dancing among stars," Niara finished, her voice warm. As the days passed, measured, still by his faithful clocks though they seemed increasingly quaint against the cosmic timescape, Tobias found himself drawn to Niara in ways that both confused and delighted him. Their shared memories created an intimacy unlike anything he'd experienced. When she showed him how to assist with navigational calculations, their hands would touch, and each time the connection grew stronger. One night, as they stood observing a meteor shower from the biodome, Niara turned to him with unusual hesitation. "Tobias, my people express closeness differently than humans, but I've learned much from your memories. May I show you how Lumidians share affection?" His heart quickened. "Yes," he said simply. She stepped closer, the light beneath her purple skin pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Slowly, she placed her palms against his chest. Where they touched, warmth spread through him, and then something more. A sensation like falling into a summer sky, boundless and bright. Her forehead touched his, and suddenly he felt young again, vibrant with possibilities rather than memories. When her lips finally met his, stars seemed to burst behind his closed eyelids. Not the passion of youth, but something deeper, like universes recognizing each other across impossible distances. "Oh," he breathed when they parted. "That was a soul touch," she said, her silver eyes luminous. "It only happens when the connection is true." That night, as they lay beside each other in comfortable silence, watching distant galaxies through the transparent ceiling of the biodome, Tobias realized he was falling in love again, at an age when he'd thought such feelings were long behind him. "I never imagined this," he whispered. A second chance at love among the stars. Niara's fingers intertwined with his, her purple skin glowing softly in the starlight. "Some journeys aren't about destinations, Tobias. They're about who travels beside you." The final horizon. 3 weeks into their journey, by Earth reckoning, the astral cartographer approached what Niara called a celestial confluence, where multiple dimensional planes intersected. The phenomenon manifested as a swirling vortex of light that made the aurora borealis seem dull by comparison. "It's a crossroads," Niara explained as they observed it from the navigation chamber. "A point where decisions must be made." Tobias understood the implications immediately. "You're saying we must choose a direction?" She nodded, the markings on her face pulsing with emotion. "My mission was to map new star systems beyond this confluence. It's a one-way journey. The dimensional shift will prevent return to this sector of space for approximately 300 Earth years." "And the alternative?" Tobias asked quietly. "The ship could return you to Earth before we cross the threshold," she said, her voice carrying a weight he hadn't heard before. "Your cottage, your clocks, all would be restored exactly as they were." The choice hung between them like an unspoken prayer. In the weeks they'd traveled together, their bond had grown beyond explanation. The memories they'd shared, the soul touches that left them both glowing with happiness, the quiet conversations about existence and time, all had woven a connection that defied the brevity of their acquaintance. "I need time to think," Tobias said. That evening he sat alone in his cottage, surrounded by the familiar ticking of his clocks. Through the windows he could see the cosmic light show of the confluence growing larger. Each timepiece seemed to ask the same question. What does time mean to a man who has already lived most of his life? He took out the pocket watch that had belonged to Eleanor, the one possession he always kept close. Opening it, he gazed at the faded photograph inside, her smile as bright as he remembered. "What would you advise, my love?" he asked softly. As if in answer, one of his astronomical clocks, the one that tracked celestial movements, suddenly chimed out of sequence. Tobias looked up in surprise. The clock's face had changed, now showing unfamiliar constellations moving in patterns he'd never seen. "Well," he said with a small smile, That's rather pointed guidance, isn't it? When Niara came to him later, her expression was carefully neutral, though the light beneath her skin betrayed her anxiety. Have you decided? She asked. I have a question first, Tobias said, taking her hands. What happens to Lumidians at the end of their lives? Surprise flickered across her features. We return to cosmic energy. Our essence joins the stars we've mapped, becoming part of the celestial tapestry. Why do you ask? Because I'm an old man, Niara, he said gently. Even if I choose to continue this journey with you, my human lifespan is limited. I don't want you to face that loss. Her expression softened and the light within her skin grew brighter. Tobias, there's something I haven't fully explained about our empathic bond. The exchanges between us, they've been changing you. Changing me? How? Your cellular structure has been gradually adapting to the cosmic energies of the ship, she explained. I've monitored it through the ship's biological sensors. Your aging process has not just slowed, it's begun to reverse. Tobias stared at her in disbelief. That's impossible. For ordinary humans, yes. But our connection, it's unprecedented. The ship believes that with continued exposure to Lumidian energy fields, you could live for centuries more. She squeezed his hands. It's not immortality, but it's a significant extension. And if I choose to return to Earth? The effects would gradually fade, she said. You would resume a normal human lifespan. Tobias sat in silence, processing this revelation. More years, centuries even, a gift beyond imagination. Yet time itself had never been what he treasured most. I've made my decision, he said finally, standing with a straightness to his spine that hadn't been there weeks ago. Eleanor had my heart for 50 wonderful years. I mourned her for 5 more. She filled my life with joy, and when she left, I thought that chapter of my existence was complete. He cupped Niara's face gently, marveling at the warmth and light that emanated from her purple skin. But you've shown me that the heart doesn't work that way. It isn't bound by time or even by worlds. Eleanor would want me to embrace this second chance at happiness, this unexpected journey. Tears like liquid starlight slipped down Niara's cheeks. You'll stay with me? Cross the confluence? Yes, Tobias said, feeling lighter than he had in decades. Let's map new stars together. As the astral cartographer approached the swirling threshold of the celestial confluence, Tobias stood with Niara in the navigation chamber, his cottage now permanently integrated into the ship's structure, a piece of Earth traveling into the unknown. Are you afraid? Niara asked as the vortex of light engulfed the viewports. No, Tobias replied truthfully, his hand firmly in hers. For the first time in years, I'm not looking back, only forward. The ship crossed the dimensional threshold, carrying them beyond known space. In the cottage's small garden, a clock that had counted seconds for nearly a century finally stopped, not in defeat, but in recognition that some journeys transcend the very concept of time itself. And as new galaxies blossomed before them, Tobias Merrick, clockmaker, widower, and now cosmic explorer, felt his heart beating in perfect synchronicity with the pulse of the universe and the woman who had found him under winter stars.